Barku, a breath to spark the human heart. G'day there, friends and family. Welcome to another episode of the Barku podcast. You're here with Mark Philpott, and today, rather than the usual monologue about things that I've found interesting, I'm joined by somebody who I find interesting. So without further ado, let's get to the conversation. Enjoy. Barku, welcome to the podcast, Ryan. How are you?
I'm good, Mark. How are you going?
Excellent. Yeah, very good, thank you.
We've started. That was.
Oh, we'll test it. We can do it again if you like.
There's no warning there. Just really launched into it. Yeah.
Well, that's what I figure. We just talk as if we were having a beer down at Bombori's.
Yeah.
And record that.
Sounds good.
Because that's pretty much what we do. Okay, so this episode of the Barku podcast, I have a guest with me, which is something new. And I'd like to introduce you to a friend, a previous work colleague of mine, and a fellow wisdom enthusiast, Ryan Harding. Ryan, thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. It's good to be here.
No worries. How's your day been?
My day, you know how my day's been. That's a loaded question. Yeah, I caught a ferry to, where does it go to? Sorrento. And back again. So I dropped off my daughter and my dog to my parents, so that we can, heading into Melbourne tomorrow to take care of some other matters. So, it was a little bit sad to have to just do the 180 as soon as I got to the other terminal, but that's taken up. That was about a 4-hour round trip, I reckon. So, that's been the bulk of it.
Very good. Well, thanks for coming out this evening. And we had a little bit of a chat beforehand about what we'd like to talk about. And we sort of figured, we sit down semi-regularly.
Yep.
And we end up finding ourselves talking about things of interest, about life, about the pursuit of wisdom and living well.
Yep.
And also in terms of business and our entrepreneurial and creative endeavours.
Yes.
So I thought we might talk about that.
My 1 and your 1400.
That's right. Yeah, but you're doing your 1, which is why I've got you on here so I can learn about how to execute. Because I think I'm good at the dreaming.
Yeah.
Whereas it's been a joy to actually watch you go from dreaming and visioning to actually creating a small business of your own. And delivering that product in those workshops to a whole lot of different young people in different settings.
Yeah, thank you. No, it has, I don't have too many runs on the board yet, but as you say, I've made a start, I think, and that sometimes is probably the hardest bit, actually launching and getting off the ground. So, my timing was pretty out. I think I went part-time at work and tried to kick things off at the beginning of COVID. And then sort of had a couple of years of cancellations, basically, and reschedules and questioning what I've done. But, last year and this year, been able to get a bit more traction and, deliver a few programs, which has been really good.
Excellent. So for people listening, your workshops, your business name is Wisdom Workshops.
Yep.
And can you tell us a little bit about what it is that looks like? What do you do on the ground?
Yeah, so Wisdom Workshop is kind of a small business / almost a bit of a passion project or hobby. So my background is in teaching, as you know. I've sort of been doing that for 10 years and I've really enjoyed it. Really enjoyed particularly just connecting with young people and sort of having an impact in that kind of teaching mentor sort of capacity.
And your primary teaching methods are?
Yeah, so health and PE is my methods, and I've really enjoyed that. Like, it's good to have a bit of variety in sort of doing the prac side of things, getting out and playing some sport and having fun in that way. But then also the health classroom is something I've enjoyed, and then nowadays got a sort of a lot of 12s and 11s, sort of more senior curriculum. But eventually, I suppose I hit a point where I felt like I was teaching a lot of curriculum as my job sort of required me to, but sort of less so some of the things I'm maybe most passionate about. Like, I'm probably not a sports nut, or a real health and PE kind of guru. I'm probably more of a sort of philosophical, deep thinker kind of guy. And I was finding that those were the conversations that I enjoyed engaging young people in the most. And I could do a little bit of that within my teaching load, but I was probably wandering outside of the curriculum in doing that. So I started, and this is sort of at both the schools that I've worked at, started just running my own in-house little sort of workshops or programs, just with whatever sort of kids wanted to come along. So I've sort of done those at lunchtime initially back at my previous school, and had a really good buy-in from kids. I sort of presented at a Year 10 assembly and just said anyone can kind of come along to this. And then later on at my current school, kind of got it going where kids could come out of class and do it, which was sort of a step towards, I suppose, legitimising it a little more. But yeah, just an opportunity for young people to explore those deeper themes of life, and those existential type questions around who am I, why am I here, what do I want from my time on this earth, which, you know, to me have always been burning questions since I was probably a teenager and a little bit of a disillusioned kind of teenager. Didn't necessarily feel like I had anyone in my life who had any more of a clue than I did.
Okay. Yes.
to delve into that with. And then kind of had to seek out some of my own answers in a really long, lengthy process and go down a lot of dead ends, which might just be part of the process anyway for anyone. But I thought, wouldn't it be great if there was something packaged for young people that kind of put them on that path, or maybe provided the beginnings of a few answers for them. So yeah, through that, Wisdom Workshop was born, and I took a leap of faith to move part-time with my teaching role, which the school was good enough to let me do. And since then have been rolling it out in high schools mostly, but also primary schools, more recently sort of higher education settings. I sort of did some work at Deakin Uni, and also some sort of community programs for sort of people that have finished school, where they could just, whoever wanted to come and join in could. So yeah, just been seeing where it's a fit, really.
Fantastic. So you've covered a lot of ground there from initial early days through to where the program's at now. Could you take us right back to those teenage years of disillusionment?
Yeah.
And feeling like you were seeking answers that nobody around you could seem to provide. What was happening for you at that time in your life?
Yeah, so I think in hindsight, a lot of my identity as a sort of teenager was built around sport in particular. Probably footy mostly. That was the thing where I was kind of playing at a higher level. I was involved in the TAC Cup program, and very much had been around footy clubs sort of throughout my whole youth, and that probably lended itself to picking up some traits and habits from that didn't probably reflect my values, but nonetheless kind of got caught up in it. It just, I mean, nothing over the top, but just that kind of really banter-driven culture where, particularly with some of the groups of people and friends that I was hanging around with, probably went too far a lot of the time and went from being a little bit cheeky to probably a little bit hurtful. And I just really picked up those sort of habits, and I would take that to my high school, and I was basically just a real smart ass kind of person. And
this is while you're at school, not as a teacher. This is
I stifle it as much as I can as a teacher. It does rear its head at times, but I think I'm probably just not a very nice person, really. I was just I just used to hang crap on people a lot and took it too far and was just projecting myself as this really cocky, arrogant kind of guy, where on the inside I was actually really insecure and a little bit lost and confused and really, really concerned with what people thought about me, which is probably true of a lot of young people. But I think that kind of led to speaking and acting in a way that, as I said before, didn't really reflect the person that I wanted to be and what mattered to me. And I was just unhappy as a result of that and a little dissatisfied with life. And I just sort of can recall thinking, well, there's got to be more to life than this experience that I'm having. And I wanted to change. I really wanted to change and didn't really know how to get it. And I'd set myself these goals that I'd just totally transform the way that I was and the way that I acted, and only to have it unravel the next day when I was back in those same situations around those same people.
Same people, yeah.
Yeah, so it took a long time actually to rewire some of those habits. And as I said, even now they're not completely out of my system, but on balance, I spend a lot more time being the person that I'd like to be now as opposed to then.
So teenage years, I mean, we both worked in high schools for a very long time, and it's a turbulent time.
Yeah.
So kids are trying to work out identity. Obviously, we've got the environmental factors, the sports we play, the families we grow up in, the culture of the school that we're part of.
Yeah.
So for a young person to find their own way to seek solutions, I find that fascinating, because more often than not, what I see until there's some sort of crisis is young people, particularly the footy club mentality, is you'll be right. You know, suck it up. You'll be right. Don't worry about it. Let's go have a beer. And not to pay too much attention to those deeper questions is almost like let's just sweep that under the rug for now. So I'm curious about who lifted the rug or what lifted the rug for you, because I mean, for a teenager to come to me and say, look, I've been setting these goals about transforming myself, that in itself...
It's atypical.
Is a little unusual.
It is, yeah.
So
good question.
What sparked that? Was it a song? What was it that sparked that there's something else?
You're right, because why didn't I continue down that tried and tested path of being that guy, you know? And look, I think my nature is that I'm a bit of an introspective, deep thinking kind of a guy, which was really at odds with kind of the personality that I would have been showing to the world at that stage. You know, the person who was, I think, the biggest catalyst for change for me is somebody that I had never met and still have never met. It was an AFL player at the time. I was obviously into AFL and watching the footy, and he played for the Sydney Swans, a team that I didn't even barrack for. His name was Brett Kirk. You heard of Brett Kirk?
Nothing about
no, okay. Well, let me tell you about Brett Kirk. So he was he ended up being the captain of Sydney, but he was kind of their, like, they use the term sometimes, spiritual leader in footy, because he just totally broke the mold. Like, he was this really not the most skillful player, but a real heart and soul player, like really courageous, always throwing his body on the line and just trying, just like gutsy efforts all the time. Like, he would just give everything he had. But then he totally broke the mold in that he wasn't a lad.
Yeah, okay.
You know, and he often fronted up to the media on behalf of the team and spoke about playing from his heart and leaving a legacy of love at the football club, and how he meditated and had these sort of rituals that he did every day. And he was a Buddhist. He identified as a Buddhist, despite being like a white guy from Albury.
Okay.
You know, so I just was like, I think to me that was like, wow, you can play footy and be your own person. Like, you can be immersed in a subculture of some sort, yet not be sort of defined by it.
Yes.
And I I became a little probably obsessed with him. Like I just couldn't get my hands on enough interviews with Brett Kirk or newspaper articles or Google searches or whatever. And I sort of, people knew, because I would always, when you're into something, you try to weave it into every conversation. Yes. So I was probably always trying to spark up Brett Kirk conversations with people. But my mum found this article in The Age, and it was footy players recommending books to read.
Okay.
And there was sort of one from each team, and Brett Kirk was the one from Sydney, and he recommended this book by Eckhart Tolle called A New Earth.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very much a New Age spirituality book, which I'd never been exposed to anything like that before. And the main message that I took from that book was about the existence of the human ego.
Mm-hmm.
And how the ego is sort of responsible for a lot of the suffering that we bring upon ourselves in life, and a lot of the sort of dysfunctional behaviour that human beings tend to demonstrate, both individually and collectively as societies. And I mean, it's going on all the time, from conflict to kind of... The book kind of linked most dysfunctional behaviour back to this idea of an ego, like a false sense of self that's based on kind of our circumstances rather than this sort of true sense of self that transcended all of that, whether you call that a soul or a heart or a spirit.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just reading this book going, this is my problem. Like, this ego thing is, it almost just spelt it out for me. So that was just a profound thing for me at that age, and that started the journey. As it turned out, that particular path, the New Age spirituality, could only take me so far, but it was a really nice sort of gateway philosophy.
Into a different way to think about things, and a model for understanding your internal world. So we've got the ego, we've got the heart or soul.
Yeah.
Paying attention to both.
Yeah.
And understanding them both and putting them in their right place.
Yeah.
Which, it's like mechanics of how we work 101, and whether it's that model or a Buddhist model or what model it is.
Yeah.
And as you said, some models will take you so far, and depending on other influences, and other things that are important to you at the time, then you may pick up another model and you may use that for a while, or take some learning from that. So that's obviously a big transformation for you. What was it like to go from head knowledge, like absorbing the Brett Kirk interviews and reading the Eckhart Tolle book, to actually making a change in the way that you were being in the world?
Yeah, it was frustrating, because you'd read this book and think, oh, here's my problem. I'll just go ahead and rectify that.
I haven't read it, so does it give you a how to rectify the problem?
Well, no, that's where I'm about to... It was really lacking in practical strategies. So it was this heavy on philosophy and heavy on kind of big picture ideas, and then I'd be like, beauty, I'll just go and spend the rest of my life as this enlightened being. But the next day I'd be back in the same situations and running my mouth, saying things that I wish I regretted immediately, so that it was kind of like, you can know the ways in which you want to change, and you can have those really clearly illuminated to you, like a book can do, or a mentor can do, or anything can do, just the results you're getting in life can do. But we're very habitual creatures, and to actually change habits that have been formed throughout your entire life, as I found out, is incredibly difficult. It would be like somebody with a really unhealthy diet seeing a nutritionist. Is that what they call it? Nutritionist? Yeah. And now they know exactly the diet they should have. Yeah. Great. But the next day, are they going to have a flawless diet? Of course not. Because they're going to have cravings, and maybe perhaps not going to know how to cook those recipes or where to get that food, or so it was frustrating because I really felt like I had found the answer that I was looking for, but that particular book wasn't forthcoming with things you could actually put into practice. It was just like
the overview of the model.
Kind of. And I guess that is an issue. That's why I felt that it could only take me so far. So since then, I've probably moved on and found some more pragmatic models, if you want to call them that, because that's sort of me, my personality too. I'm quite methodical in the way I go about things, and wanted to apply that just to the way I lived in general too.
So you've shifted from New Age spirituality, which is probably when we started having these conversations a few years ago. I think
that's where I was at the time.
That was kind of where you were at.
But wasn't a. But I had been there for probably 7 or 8 years. You know.
And was that the basis for the first iteration of the workshops back in the
Yeah. So it was. Yeah. Funnily enough, I was basically the second coming of Eckhart Tolle.
Yes. Did you have a white robe?
No, but that was probably holding me back. Actually, I didn't look the part.
No wonder it didn't work for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was picking on the kids, being a smart ass the whole time. No, it was. I was teaching kind of like ego and those ideas. And the kids that were there in front of me were really, really enjoying that content.
Yeah. In
the same way that I enjoyed it when I first found it, and finding a lot of it was resonating. Like I had a girl kind of send me a message like 10 years later saying how it just was so really transformational thing for her, that sort of content, and she had gone on with it. And another kid that sort of stopped me in the street and mentioned, that he'd really got a lot from it. This was back when it was a lunchtime club type thing.
Did you get similar, kids hitting out 10 years later for that PE class you taught? Or that?
Oh, just legions of them.
Legions.
Actually. So, I've actually got security cameras up around my house.
But it's good, and I know we all feel appreciated when we've introduced somebody to a different way of thinking and they've picked it up, and it's made a difference for them. It's picked them up, it's changed how they feel about life, changed their direction for the future, it's given them hope.
Yeah.
It's injected a whole new lens for them to see the world through.
Yeah, that's maybe a little excitable, but a couple of them seemed to have. Like. Yeah, it possibly does. I'm hesitant to say that. That's what my programs did, but especially in those early days. But yeah, it maybe some kids were trapped in a similar kind of cycle to me at that age, and then it was a nice alternative view of the fairly mundane world that you can sometimes feel like at that age, where we're forced to go into school every day. And to that point, a lot of our lives have been dictated to us.
Yes.
It's maybe a nice breath of fresh air and exciting, that the future could hold some different possibilities.
Yeah. At the very least, it means, hey, when I get out of school, I can think about what really matters to me.
Yeah.
I can build a life around it, which isn't a conversation that I think a lot of us get in school, and I don't know if school is necessarily the place that always wants to be part of that conversation.
Nor is it necessarily possible to be that person when you're the teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an interesting thing that I've observed is when I've rolled it out, it was a little bit different when I was framing it as this program and getting kids to come and do it, because was a little bit special, different to class. But at times I've tried to incorporate, there is space within health classes to kind of look at values and things.
Mm-hmm.
And very minimal buy-in comparatively, because I'm the guy that also calls their parents when they misbehave and also assesses and reports on them and also pulls them up for uniform. So to be that figure, but then also try to be
about your values and what matters to you.
It's a little,
but tuck your shirt in.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it's a little bit of it's a bit jarring in that way. So when you're coming in as the external person, the presenter, that can just be Mr. Relaxed and totally on their side the entire time, I find you have a lot more sway in that scenario.
Yes.
But then you see him a lot less.
Yes.
You know? So there's pros and cons, because your teacher, you're there all year, you get that regular interaction with them, which can be really powerful too. And obviously there's nearly everyone has a story about a teacher that impacted them in a really positive way. But yeah.
So I might bring you back to, that was the first iteration of the program, and it was good and kids got pretty excited. And I think that's a familiar story, because coming out of a church sort of setting, I'd say similarly, particularly adolescents, because this is a time for redefining identity, working out who you are, what matters. And you get this big buzz of excitement after a big event, like a camp or like a big sporting event between all the churches and stuff. They hear this message, they get swept up in it, and they go, this is amazing.
Yeah.
And then, what's next? And the practicality side of it, in terms of not just knowing that there's this whole different perspective and a way of being in the world.
Yeah.
But like you said, I mean, you're pre-programmed by the time you're about 7 years old to behave in a particular way. So most of our subconscious learning up to the age of 7 dictates the way that we're going to behave, the attitudes that we have towards people around us. Our fight or flight response kicks in. It knows when to defend us, how to defend us, what we should be afraid of, what we should be anxious about, what we should attack, what we should accept, how to survive in the world is in there. And if we're going to remodel that and reshape it, then what you said about being more pragmatic and going beyond just the big picture view, I think is really important. So do you want to chat a little bit about some of the things you've discovered since those early days that you've worked into the second iteration, third iteration of the workshops now?
14th iteration.
14th iteration.
I almost I don't redesign it, but every time I sort of pick up a new school, I almost go back to every session and tinker. But yeah, so I had this program that was based around Eastern philosophy, essentially, the New Age stuff. And I pretty quickly realised that, for one thing, it was really hard to explain what it was without sounding really alternative and out there. And that doesn't really... You're not going to have a lot of success in public schools coming in saying, I'm teaching kids spirituality or something. So I realised I needed something that was a little more based in evidence and science. And I had this book that I had bought at uni. I saw it in the bookshop and it was kind of like calling out to me. It was called The Happiness Trap.
Yes.
And I picked it up off the shelf, and this was during I was still looking for answers at that stage, and I got home excited to read it. And the first sort of thing it started talking about was how, as human beings, we just unpleasant emotions and sort of unhelpful thoughts are just a part of life, and we kind of just have to accept them and notice them and sort of be non-reactive. And it sort of was implying that that's just an unavoidable part of life. Now, at that stage, I was more kind of thinking, no, I want a life that doesn't have any of that in it. I want to transcend all of that, which is kind of maybe a misconstrued message I'd taken from the Eckhart Tolle stuff, where you could kind of just not suffer anymore, just kind of be happy all the time. So I read this book and I was like, what do you mean I've got to be okay with my uncomfortable emotions? I'm getting rid of them. But
yes.
This stupid book, and I kind of shelved it. No, I put it on the shelf, I should say. I didn't stick it anyway. And I put it on the shelf and just said, I'm not into that.
Yeah.
So there, again, 10 years later, I sort of stumbled upon that book again and started reading it. And for whatever reason, it just was resonating a lot more And it was full of like practical strategies. So it was based around this model called acceptance and commitment therapy, which was really well supported by research and widely used in a lot of different settings, but particularly by psychologists. And it has its origins in sort of Buddhism and Eastern philosophy, but they've kind of taken some of those key ideas and given them,
they've tested it,
more scientific names and put it to the test, and have found that, yeah, you can kind of take this really mindful approach to life and in very specific ways with specific strategies, and have a lot of sort of positive implications for your mental health and your sense of purpose and your sense of meaning in life. And yeah, so I started sort of picking that up and using those principles to inform my program and my sessions, and could proceed with a lot more confidence at that point, because I knew I had the backing of something that a lot of work had gone into it by people other than me.
And we live in an evidence-based culture, particularly within schools, where they like to be able to say, yes, if we do A, B and C, we'll get these results.
Yeah, and I think that's important, because otherwise, particularly if you're selling your program and you're putting a fee on it, I mean, I could just be coming in with stuff that I've dreamt up, and it could just be doing nothing, you know? And like, I know things don't have to have an evidence basis to be effective, but the things that do have an evidence basis definitely are effective. You know, so whilst, yes, there's things out there that work, there's also plenty that don't work.
Yeah.
You know, so it's, to me, having a body of research behind something is just kind of a certified, yes, this is proven.
This is good. It works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know we go through this, we
do talk
about this a lot, because maybe you're a touch more skeptical.
I think it's really interesting, or a couple of things. I think it's really fascinating that basically when you read through Russ Harris' Happiness Trap, it's very similar principles to a lot of Buddhist, Eastern philosophy, mindfulness practices, which people have been using to improve their lives for centuries. And then they've taken it, they've done a body of research, they've said, yes, it's work, it's effective, which is important for funding models and governments and things like that, to continue to provide those services. So I get that. But the thought I was having while you're talking about is the next iteration, when it gets better again, we find a slightly better way to do things. That's where we actually go from, we take what's good and evidence-based and proven, and we start to play off that and build on that as a platform for something new. And then that gets evaluated down the track, and they say, oh, look, that...
For sure. But until it does get evaluated, it's something that's really effective and not evidence-based.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I see your point. Anecdotal evidence.
Anecdotal. I see, yeah, it's a valid point. Like,
because if nobody has the courage to step out and try something new,
yeah,
we just get stuck with the old model. And I mean, if ACT had never been evaluated,
yeah,
which is only really recent, we'd still all just be stuck with CBT.
Yeah.
Which, we've talked about that too. ACT is definitely emerging as one of the more preferential treatments for a lot of practitioners.
Yeah.
Not to say that all the multitude of other therapies aren't effective, because there are plenty that do have evidence bases. But it takes somebody to have the courage to invest in it, to do the research as well.
Well, and to get the backing of the institutions with the money, with their own biases, to actually... And we're not just talking about one. I mean, you need to get... To be really well established, you need thousands of peer-reviewed articles. I'm pretty sure. I mean, that's my understanding of it. So that's a lot of people need to buy into what you're doing. So, yeah, for sure there's things out there that work for people that don't necessarily have an evidence basis. But, yeah, you're right. Like, sometimes the evidence is just our own anecdotal evidence.
So I'm curious, anecdotally...
Yeah.
since you've been playing with ACT and learning about it and putting it into practice for yourself personally, as well as teaching it to young people, what are perhaps like 3 of the top things or transformations that you've noticed since you've incorporated that into your way of living?
Definitely the number one radical shift for me was this idea of totally accepting your emotional states and trying to drop any kind of resistance to an emotion, particularly a really uncomfortable one, like anxiety or anger or sadness. Just totally making space, letting it be there, whilst you get on with the job of living a values-driven life. Where in the past I was probably more of the view of, I feel whatever feeling, got to make it go away. What can I do to make it go away? What can I do to make it not show up again as well? And of course, with that approach, you're beating your head against the wall, because emotions, they're just part of life. And they will come again. And it's almost, ironically, the more you struggle with them, the more they come back and the stronger they get. Well, again, that's what the science actually says. So this idea of acceptance rather than avoidance was just a game changer for me.
And for people who haven't experienced it, what does that acceptance look like? I mean, because some people might hear that and go, well, if I'm feeling angry, does that mean I just get to punch somebody in the face who I'm angry with?
Yeah, so I guess accepting an emotion, we don't necessarily accept the words and actions that often accompany the emotion, or we don't endorse them. Like, I can feel angry and I can allow that anger to sit within me somewhere. I mean, it's going to show up as a sensation in my body, be that my chest or my head, and I can actually imagine that I'm opening up that area of my body and letting the anger sit there. And then at the same time, continue to speak and act in ways that reflect my values. So the other really important thing about ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, is that you know your values and you're always trying to take action to reflect them in the way you live. So most people don't value being violent or being really rude or nasty or unpleasant towards somebody.
But they do value kindness, generosity, being caring.
Yes. Supportive. I mean, that's the majority of people would fit into that category. Yet our emotions often have the power to, when we're experiencing them, take us away from our values and start behaving in ways that don't align. So to get back to your example, if I'm feeling angry and I start yelling and abusing people, which is a pretty common sort of thing that you see, well, then anger has taken me away from my values. Whereas if I can notice that I'm angry, make space for it, be okay with the anger, and then rather than direct my energy towards some kind of internal struggle with it, direct it towards just aligning with my values in that moment of anger, I could feel angry and act calmly or act kindly. And that is that's a skill. But yeah, it's sort of separating what we do from how we feel, I suppose.
One of the other things in ACT that I find interesting is the more you do make space for those feelings, the less they tend to hang around.
As in the quicker they leave.
The less you struggle with them.
Yeah.
The more you try not... Like, if we're trying not to feel angry when we're angry, then we're not paying attention to what's beneath that anger. So we're not getting the message from our bodies and our emotions about what we're experiencing. And the more we ignore that message, then the longer we have to... we actually experience the emotion we're trying to get rid of.
Yeah. So it's kind of like letting it run its course. And yeah, you're right. Like the two byproducts of that process is that the emotion tends to not hang around as long and not come back as frequently. But the paradox is
that's not the goal.
That's not the goal. And if you make that the goal, you're now trying to avoid being angry.
So it'll hang around longer.
So you're resisting. So you kind of have to... The goal is to be okay with it.
Yeah.
And a byproduct of that is that it tends to diminish a little quicker and not be quite as intense and not escalate to the point where you've got layers upon layers of unpleasant emotions, like you're feeling angry and now I'm angry at myself for feeling angry and now I'm anxious that the anger's still there and now I'm sad that I got anxious about being angry. Like we can...
Yeah.
Whereas if we nip it in the bud, just say, okay, I'm angry and that's all right, then it, tends to surge, hit a peak and sort of gradually fade out without us adding fuel to the fire, so to speak.
Very good. So we've got noticing your your values, noticing emotions, being okay with emotions.
Accepting emotions, I'd say, or that's the terminology, yeah. Well, yeah, the values sort of underpins it all, so that's probably what you'd start with, know your values, and that's sort of what I do in our first session. We explore the idea of purpose in life and kind of whether there's a relationship between our values and our sense of purpose, and if aligning with values would make life feel more purposeful, which I believe it does. And so your values and you kind of regularly reflect on them and remind yourself of them. I do that every morning. And then kind of using that skill of presence, like coming into the moment and making conscious decisions to reflect your values in the things you say and do, kind of all the time, and with a really flexible mindset that of course there's going to be lots of situations where you don't nail that, and you blurt something out that you wish you didn't say, and you do something shitty to someone, and that's just life, and that will always be. But over time we can do less of those sorts of unvalued actions because we're making more choices that do align. So that's kind of, I suppose, the core of it. And then there's, well, how do we manage the thoughts and emotions that steer us away from that path? So that's the acceptance strategies for your emotions. And then there's this other set of strategies for your thoughts, which can do the same thing. Like I might value resilience and persistence when I'm working towards a goal. Yet my mind might constantly conjure up thoughts that I'm no good at this and I should give up and what am I even bothering for?
Yep. So
to continue being persistent and resilient, that we can't allow those sort of thoughts to consume us. And again, same principle, if I try to fight that thought off and make it go away, I'm probably turning the volume up on it and magnifying it a bit. So the ACT model talks about diffusion. So you notice the thought, just like you notice the emotions. You notice the thought, and instead of trying to disprove it or fight it or struggle with it, you just create some mental distance from it. So you're kind of becoming the observer of your thoughts rather than the person who is consumed by the thought. And in doing so, we kind of see it for what it is, a piece of mental activity, one of tens of thousands that arise every day, that might be of some use, but might also be totally unhelpful. And we don't have to engage with it. We can actually just choose to notice it, let it be there, and not allow it to guide our kind of behaviours.
So these are all practices too. So these aren't like one-off. It's not a silver bullet.
Well, they're skills,
I'd
say. Yeah, that you sort of need to hone.
Yeah. Through repetition.
Like any
through skills, doing it, sometimes not getting it quite right. Reflecting, going again the next day.
For sure, yeah. Just practicing all the time and, seeking guidance from, typically a person would learn ACT through a psychologist who guides them every step of the way.
all through the book, which...
Well, they've done studies on the... Was this what you were segueing to? They've done studies on some of the books and found that it's... For some people, it's enough to read the book and teach yourself the strategies, and you can have a fairly marked improvement in those areas just from doing that.
See, that resonates for me, because that's almost like the spiritual practices of old, where you just learn these practices. You learn these skills. You learn this model of the world, and you do it. You do it over and over and over again. You do it for long enough, it becomes the way you see and behave in the world.
Yeah.
And it has some positive impact.
Yeah.
And what else? The other thing I like about that is you're giving people the tools to be in the driver's seat for their own life. So for a young person who learns these skills now, then it's not like going to see somebody who will fix my problem, which is kind of our Western mindset, I think, when it comes to a lot of mental health. At least in my experience, is we hope that we can go to see someone like a doctor who will write us a script and solve the problem for us. Rather than being I'm going to go and learn how to take care of this for myself, whether it's my health, my physical health, or my mental health.
Well, it's like I know you're a big Proverbs man.
Yes, you got one.
What's a proverb or a saying? Is there a difference?
Like a wisdom saying.
Okay.
Proverb is a wisdom saying.
Give a man a fish and he'll eat for a day. Teach a man to fish and he'll eat forever. Yes. I think that one sprung to mind there because, you can see a psychologist who might reframe all your thinking and you might walk out with a fresh perspective that feels really good. Or you could see one who teaches you the skill of reframing things on your own or diffusing or whatever model they're using, that the reframing is more of a CBT thing. Really valid one too, I think. But and then you can take it and learn it and use it yourself and come up with your own tips and tricks around it, which I'm sure is probably what 95% of psychologists are doing, trying to teach the client to...
Yeah, but I like this too because it doesn't wait for a problem to emerge. Like you can learn these skills now. Like I almost think the best time to learn these skills is when there's no crisis.
Yeah, okay. Whereas nearly everyone who seeks help has got some sort of crisis.
Yeah.
That's a really good point, that sort of proactive model.
But the trouble is then motivating somebody to learn these skills when there's not a major crisis or a big enough problem to solve. But a big enough problem to solve could be just that sense of, you know what, I'm going to finish, and this is a big one that I just heard over and over again, heard a kid talking about today. I'm going to finish high school in a year, 2 years, and I don't know what I'm going to do. I've got no idea what I want to do. You know, and I think learning these sort of skills, year 9, year 10, earlier, whenever, but having that skill set to sit with and learn from the emotions going on inside ourselves at that stage of life when we're making decisions is invaluable. You know, and I think that could be one of the motivating factors for a lot of young people is, well, what am I going to do next? How am I going to shape my life? How am I going to take control and steer this ship? Because like I said, school, they tell you what time to arrive.
Yeah.
They tell you when to move class. They tell you what you went to eat, when you can go to the toilet.
Yeah.
How that day is structured. All of a sudden you're in the driver's seat. And I think these are the sort of skills that allow people to do that in a way that feels not necessarily good all the time, but is congruent with their values and it reflects who they want to be in the world.
Which in a nutshell, to me, is the word purpose.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and if I now do need to condense the work that I'm doing into one sentence, which is often what people want, it's connecting young people to a greater sense of purpose. Because if you know the type of person you want to be and the type of life you want to have, and you have some skills to get you there, or at least get you on that path moving in that direction, to me that equals a sense of purpose. Like I've got this life and I know what I'm doing with it. as opposed to I've got this life and I'm living it and I'm just sort of floating and being pulled along by other people in this direction and that direction, and societal values, which are often really fraught with a lack of any substance. I find it a really neat little model that you can almost...
And it's not imposing a particular set of values either, which I find interesting.
It is, yeah, that's true, isn't it? It's letting the person decide what matters, where perhaps, you could speak to this better than me, but perhaps religious institutions maybe adopt a similar approach, but they give the values.
It tends to be a little more in terms of what you should think, rather than, let's reflect on that experience and see what works.
Yeah.
And let's take from your learning experience, because you can only really know what works in terms of your first or second hand experience, like your own experience, people around you, what you've observed in the news.
Yeah.
And learn to ask good questions about what was happening, who had the power in that situation. How did that company choose to treat those employees? You know, or how is this country treating that country? How is that teacher treating these students? Is that the way I like to be treated? And I suppose, look, there are principles. There are principles. So we got principles tend to come into things. So things like treat other people in a way that you would like to be treated, which is kind of an iteration of one of the 10 Commandments. There are kind of guiding principles that help us to think about these things, or walk a mile in somebody else's shoes. You know, to me, for me, that's kind of the core of it. If you wouldn't like other people doing it to you, maybe you should ask if somebody else wants you to do that to them first. You know.
Have we just moved into like a dating?
It works in a whole lot of different settings. But,
Yeah. Yeah.
So there are like some
things that can kind of lead people. So what you're saying is don't go ahead and prescribe someone a set of values, but you might be in a role one day where you can guide them in a certain direction with their values.
Or at least ask the question.
Yeah, be that person that asks the critical questions that makes them have to consider what does matter to them. Because particularly but I'd say all people, but particularly young people, if you tell them the way they have to be, the natural instinct is to go like, screw you, I'm not doing what you say, I'll do the other thing.
See how that works.
I'll do the opposite.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know? So it's like telling my toddler to share. It's like, no.
It's also not developmentally appropriate yet. So,
yeah, exactly.
You know, so these are all important skills for, particularly I think at any age, but for young people who's we're both familiar with working with, it's a critical time for starting to learn some of these skills and turn your mind to what your values are and what's worked, what hasn't worked in your life so far. Is there anything else you wanted to add to that in terms of other reflections on some of the results or some of the feedback that you've had from some of the kids that have participated, the young people who have participated in the workshop so far, from high school to university students?
Is this, you giving me an opportunity to toot my horn here?
Well, I'm giving you an opportunity to get anything else out there before we wrap it up, because I feel like we've been chatting for quite a while now.
Yeah. Now, look, I'm pretty rigorous in collecting data.
Mm-hmm.
Like pre-post, typical teacher stuff. Pre-post data and general feedback. And look, I've found it pleasing the majority of the time that kids feel like it's fairly impactful and fairly important work and seem to connect with it. Not all kids. I'm sort of finding that kind of the young people need to be ready for it, need to be open to receive it. There's been times where students have been put in because they're really disengaged, and perhaps it's not really the program for them because they're kind of not willing to accept, at that particular point in time, not willing to accept anything that's being offered to them.
Yeah.
But I'd say for the majority of young people that are into it and want to be there, they are equally as... They have that sort of epiphany that I had when I was first introduced to these ideas, and it's kind of like, wow, like what a better way to look at the world and myself than perhaps what society tells me to. A society that's very extrinsically driven at times and very materialistic, and that's tends to be a path to nowhere.
Well, thank you, Ryan, for joining me today. I think we will wrap it up here. But if anyone is interested in participating in a workshop, or perhaps they know a young person who is at that point where there is a readiness and there is a searching and a yearning for some new skills, some new ways of being in the world.
Yeah.
How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I've got a website which is wisdomworkshop.com.au. I'm on Instagram, I think it's wisdomworkshop_AU, and then Facebook, I think you just type Wisdom Workshop in and it'll pop up somewhere. It's probably my Achilles heel, my self-promotion, so thank you for putting me on the spot here. But yeah, look, any of those, and then there's Ryan at wisdomworkshop.com.au is my email address. So
Brilliant.
I am a little bit limited in, I only do this one day a week, but yeah, certainly always keen to speak to like a new group or community group or school or anyone that's sort of interested in having me in to work with a group of young people, sort of anywhere up to 25 years of age and anywhere down to probably 12. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Ryan.
Thank you, Mark. It was a pleasure.
See you soon.
Yeah.
Hey there, thank you for listening to this podcast with Ryan Harding. If you would like to find out more about what Ryan is up to in the world, please go and check out his website at wisdomworkshop.com. If you work with a group of young people and you're interested in an evidence-based, wisdom-informed program to help those young people find their way in the world, I can highly recommend Ryan's work. I've talked to several of the young people he's worked with, both high school aged and university aged, and the feedback has been fantastic. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Barku podcast. If you have, please share it with your friends, please subscribe, and if you don't mind, even leave us a review. And until next time, Barku.